Welcome back to Her Birth, Her Story, where we share real, raw birth experiences. I'm Brooke, your host, and today's episode holds a deeply layered and meaningful motherhood journey. My guest began through foster care. We just really get to hear the raw emotion and heart for this season of her life. She will share her 2 birth stories and just how redemptive the second one was from the first. And she will also be sharing the heartbreak through miscarriage, and she opens up about that. So this can be very triggering too, so I will make sure that we say that before we get into it, and please feel free to skip through that part. I really think that you're going to feel empowered because her story is just a powerful reminder that motherhood doesn't always just follow one straight path, and that every chapter, both joyful and painful, deserves to be acknowledged. So today we're holding space for all of it as we reclaim birth. Hi, Ellen. Thanks for coming on Her Birth, Her Story. You're a working mom. How do you feel that really shaped your pregnancies and your births moving forward?
Yeah, so for pregnancies, I do feel like it was a challenge to be able to balance both the demands of growing a little one and also the attentiveness to working. I know with my first pregnancy, I had a great amount of sickness. Physically was hard while trying to keep it a secret within the office just because I wanted that privacy during that time. And so I think also with the second one, I felt the same way. There was definitely some sickness, not as much, thankfully, but just trying to safeguard that and just take care of growing a human. So as far as pregnancy, I just feel like being a working mom sometimes is hard to have that privacy and that ability to just fully focus on not only your home environment, but also focus on, giving yourself the proper rest and nourishment and hydration. And so that was just one aspect that I feel like being a working mom was challenging.
Mm-hmm.
I also think you can overthink pregnancy. So from that standpoint, being a working mom was good to, kind of be distracted with work and just demands of life and not overthink anything. Towards birth, personally, I don't feel like being a working mom has impacted me too much in this area for birth. I don't really think that it coincides. But for postpartum, the reality of only having 3 months before returning back to work was definitely a struggle, and just navigating pumping every 2 to 3 hours during the workday and also trying to catch up on work when you've been out for such a long period of time. That just changed my perspective essentially for when I was home and just being able to value and capitalize on those first 3 months that I have with both children. I'm forever grateful that I got the full 12 weeks because most moms can't say that. And my heart goes out to them for that.
Thanks for touching on that. I want to jump into your unique journey to motherhood. You started fostering. And what really made you want to pursue that?
Yeah, so at the time following college, I was around my church friends a lot, and there happened to be a couple who were foster parents that at the time they had a boy who was probably about 7 and a little girl who was just over 1. And I just remember watching them week in and week out, and my heart was just drawn towards them, drawn towards the ministry that they were in. And I always desire that for myself in that season. And I remember one time I was over just hanging out with my friend, and I made a comment, I wish I could be a foster parent, but I think because I'm too young and I'm single that I wouldn't be able to. And she said that was absolutely not the case, that she would be happy to provide me with the information and that I could pursue it. And so I left her house and I did call the foster agency and I made myself available and I asked to get certified. It was a pretty lengthy process. It almost took an entire year, if I can remember correctly, just getting certified, doing home checks, background check, classes. And I remember it just like it was yesterday. I was fully certified in only a couple of days had gone by, and I was getting ready to go to CrossFit. And I walked outside, got in my car, saw that I was getting a call. I picked it up. It happened to be one of the reps for the locum agency. And she told me that they had a placement and asked me if I would be interested. And they told me that they had drug addicted newborn twins. And um, of course, I was just happy to take any child. This is what I had been preparing for. And so I said yes. And it was the best yes. It was the start of motherhood for me, and having twins and having them be drug addicted. I got the brunt of it all up front. And so it's just special because those first few moments were really challenging, trying to navigate motherhood as a single woman with 2 babies and working full time.
Can you speak to just like kind of the emotions that you're going through just with that transition from one day you're a single young woman to now having 2 babies to take care of?
Yeah, absolutely. When I initially got that call, I wasn't sure exactly how the process worked to receive the children. And I was notified that they were going to be sending over paperwork. I finalized my signature, and these happened to be based out of a city that was 2.5 hours away from me. And so they asked me to meet them halfway. And so I ended up picking up my mom. We got in the car, we drove, and we met the caseworkers in a McDonald's parking lot, which makes me emotional because it just shows you the foster care system and just the brokenness behind these children having to leave their biological parents and be with someone that they never knew. We were in a McDonald's parking lot, and I parked. I got out of my car. There was a van, and the caseworker got out of the car, and she said, "Are you ready for this?" And I said, "I am." And she opened up the van door, and there were the smallest little precious newborn babies. And it was just, it all like sunk at one time, like the reality of like, these are children that are now entrusted in my care. It was just a beautiful moment knowing that I was going to get to take these children home and love them and protect them and care for them. They gave me the children and I put them in the car. They didn't tell me when they last fed. They didn't tell me when they last changed them. There was no communication in that regard. And so I didn't know anything. And a lot of the cases, that is, you just don't know. And we were driving. We made it like maybe an hour, and they were sleeping both very hard. And all of a sudden, they start crying. And so we pull over on the side of the road, and I realized they were probably hungry. And so I thankfully had formula and bottles in my car, and I like made a bottle and gave it to them. And then we got, back on the road and headed home. And I do have to say that because they were drug addicted, they required a lot of touch and a lot of care. And so I just remember never really sleeping at night. I just always held them. That's what they needed, and that's what I made myself available to do. There was just a great sense of joy being able to care for them. And those were my first few moments of being a foster parent, and I'll never forget them. And the weeks leading up to it and the weeks following getting those children are unmatched. It's just the joy that children bring to a family and in this world.
I'm sure, a lot of listeners too are just really grateful that you made that choice, because we need good people in foster care too, because those babies deserve to have somebody care for them. And so I just thank you for doing that and being so vulnerable with our listeners too about those emotions.
I appreciate those kind words. And I feel like oftentimes when I share my story, people are so quick to jump in and say, thank you so much for being that for them. I always reassure them that really it had nothing to do with what I gave them, but everything to do with what they gave me. I put myself out there and gave them the love and attention that I could, but what I've taken from that journey and what I've taken from each kid is just such a gift and something that I'll forever treasure.
We're going to go into the next step of your motherhood journey. So I'm just going to let you go ahead and tell your birth story uninterrupted.
Yeah. So some expectations that I had going into pregnancy and birth. I didn't have much. I was a naive mother. I have to say that one thing that I've learned in motherhood is that the world screams that having babies is easy, in the sense of so many women do it that it's perceived to just be a way of life. And nobody opens up and talks about the labor pains, talks about trauma in birth. Nobody talks about postpartum and things that you navigate in that realm. And so with all of that, I was a victim of the naive mom perspective, thought it was going to be easy. If the person down the street can do it, I can do it. And, if this person who may be perceived as less capable, let's just say even from like maybe an athletic standpoint, if they can do it so easily because the only thing that you see is a picture of the birth and delivery of the child and you didn't get to see anything that actually occurred, you assume that it was easy to bring life forth. I was naive through it all. I wish I would have educated myself more. I thought it was going to be easy, and that leads me into my story. I got pregnant. Let's first just talk about mother to mother, how beautiful that moment is to see a positive pregnancy test. I just remember coming home from work over my lunch break, and I had went and just bought a pregnancy test. And it was so funny because I remember standing in the Target pregnancy test aisle, and there was like a pharmacy off to my right, and there was some women there waiting for their prescriptions. And I remember like trying to figure out which pregnancy test I should buy. And I felt like I was like not supposed to be there, like one of those, like I was like a young child, like not ready to start a family. And like, I felt like they were judging me, and I felt like I looked young, and I also had no idea what I was doing. I came home and I was 2 or 3 days past my period, which was just not normal. I'm very routined. And so I wasn't expecting to be pregnant. And I remember like going up to my bathroom and took the test. I did video my reaction of finding out because I like to document those types of events.
For sure.
And I remember like turning it over, and I just have this video. I just start sobbing, and like it was just me, myself, and I in the bathroom, tears running down my face, just thanking the Lord. Like I just remember like the words coming out of my mouth were just praise and thanksgiving to God for this blessing that He's provided me in my womb. And there's just such a special moment. And for the moms that are yet to be moms who are like anticipating a positive pregnancy test, really capitalize on those moments, because they're so fleeting and you only experience that once or a couple times in your life. But throughout the whole pregnancy, I was very sick. I would throw up 15, 20, 25 times a day, morning till night. I remember early on, as I was trying to adapt, like I just felt so physically depleted because I couldn't keep any nourishment down. And so I know there has to be some moms out there that are pregnant and discouraged because it's just constant sickness, nausea. And I just encourage you, take it a day at a time and reach out to your community of friends and family and make sure that they're there to be able to love you and provide water, food, listening ear. Like that was so important to me. That was a long pregnancy of sickness, and I was adamant not to get on any medication until I was well into my second trimester. It was just a personal preference of mine. And so just enduring that was challenging, but I did end up getting the medication to relieve the nausea. And for my first pregnancy, I don't believe that it worked entirely. My second pregnancy, I do think, was a little bit better in that regard. Then I was 40 weeks and 3 days. And I remember it was the day before I had a appointment with my OB. And I was like, when's this child coming? And, because so often they tell you like at 40 weeks, you are going to deliver your child. And the night before I had my appointment, I had decided the smallest little amount of a membrane sweep, more so just scrolling social media and seeing like, hey, if you haven't had your child, try this. And so I didn't know much. And I remember going into my appointment at 40 weeks and 4 days. And I did ask for a membrane sweep, but we both agreed that we would just do like a light one. And so she lightly did a membrane sweep and I came home. My appointment was at 3:30. It was now like 6:30 and we were eating dinner. And I remember just something feeling like a little off. And I was like, oh, that's kind of uncomfortable. And I remember my husband looking at me and he was like, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I don't know, something just feels off, but I think I'm good. And didn't think too much of it. And then I went to bed. That was probably around 9 because I'm an early bird when it comes to that. I woke up 2 hours later and labor hit me like a freight train. And it was like 0 to 100. And I just remember like thinking, I can't sleep anymore. So I got out of bed, and I didn't really know what to do. And so I like went downstairs and I got some water. And I just remember like laboring in my living room. And I fought those contractions so hard. I did not listen to my body at all. I fought against my body for the entirety of my labor, and that really complicated things. And I like just remember these intense waves of pain. I would fight against them. I would tense up, and then I would literally just like squeeze and like suck in and like try to like work against my body. And so I did that from 11 to like 2 o'clock in the morning. And this was all by myself. And I was letting my husband sleep because I thought that was the right thing to do. And so I was like 2 o'clock, and I remember going upstairs and I went into the nursery and I was laboring in the nursery, and it was just wave after wave after wave of contraction. And like I would just grab on to whatever I could and just like hang on for dear life. I felt like the breaks in between, I honestly, like maybe 10 seconds. I know that wasn't reality, but I didn't educate myself to know that contractions come and they go and you have a rest period and then the next contraction hits. Eventually, I couldn't take the pain anymore. And I was like, I have to wake my husband up. And so I start making my way down the hallway to our bedroom. And I remember I was halfway down the hallway and one hit me, and I just like bent over and I was like, yeah, no, I don't think I'm gonna get him. Like, because I was just like, I can't, like, I can't
Yeah.
walk into the room. And so I like turned around and I just continued to like labor in the nursery. And I was like, okay, I got to get out of here. And so I went into my room. I remember my husband opening up his eyes and he was like, is it time? And he hadn't known that I'd been laboring for, a couple hours at that point, which I thought was comical. And I was like, yeah, it's time. And I hadn't packed my hospital bag, and I was 40 weeks and 4 days. And so I'm sitting there in labor trying to pack my hospital bag. And I remember we came downstairs and I got in the car, and that felt like the longest drive to the hospital. We only live 10 minutes away, if that. And I just remember like clinging to the side door. I, was demanding my husband to drive faster or don't hit as many bumps. And, are we there yet 50 times? And don't turn on the music and don't touch me and don't offer me any food or water. And so at that point, I just felt like I was miserable, And so I'm like, this was not what I was experiencing. Like, I was so excited about labor and delivery. And here I was like, this isn't for me. I don't even know if I want future children. Like, get me out of the situation.
Yeah.
And so I get to the hospital. I went up to the check-in area. The guy was like, what are you here for? And I said, I'm in labor. And he was asked me like 50 questions. And in my head, I'm thinking like, does it not look like I'm in pain? And so they ended up getting a wheelchair for me, and they got me into a room. It was on the right. That's important for later in my second pregnancy story. They give you the IV and they ask you a bunch of questions. And at that point, I truly was just fighting for my life. And so I got in the bed and I just remember like clinging to the side, like there was even an opening, and I remember putting my hand through it and just like hugging it. And I was just continuing to fight these contractions through and through. And I remember at one point the nurse offered me the ball and I was like, I guess I'll try it. And I got off the bed and I sat on that ball, and like within not even half a second, I immediately stood up and I said, yeah, we're not doing that. It was just so uncomfortable and so much pressure. And I was like, I can't withstand that. And so I got back in the bed, and I remember my loving husband was trying to be invested, and I so appreciate that from him. We never talked about what he was to do, what his role was, what my desires were. And so I felt like because it wasn't what I was expected, I just wanted to be left alone. I wanted to be isolated. I wanted to just push through for myself. And I remember like he would come over and like try to talk to me or like touch my arm, and I'd be like, get away from me, or like, like please don't talk. And like I was trying to be like compassionate and kind through my gestures and words to him. But like in that moment, I just genuinely didn't know like how to respond, but I just needed time to get through it. And so I remember he like went over to the side. I later learned that he was just praying over me, which is like the sweetest thing. And I remember nurses coming in and out. And what I recall, I was only getting fluids prior to birth. What is disappointing is when I got my invoice after delivery, it had Pitocin on there. So I, to this day, am not entirely sure if I was given Pitocin or not. It was never communicated. Something I did not ask for, did not want against my consent. And that was frustrating. But I was approaching 10 centimeters finally. And I forgot to mention that when I arrived at the hospital, I was only 3 centimeters, maybe almost 4. So I was approaching 10 centimeters, and I was so grateful that the physician and OB that was on call was the one that I had desired. And she was getting ready to come in to deliver. And I remember them asking slightly if they could have nurses that would like, who were like preceptorship, who were just there for observation hours, if they could come and witness the delivery. And I did say yes. I wish I would have advocated for myself because I didn't necessarily want that, but I did say yes. And at the time, I did think it was only going to be one student. And right before I pushed, there were 10 students that walked into the room. And they were all lined up right in front of me. And I just remember like feeling like I had an audience before me, and I was not expecting that. And your legs are wide open. That was kind of a disappointment. And then the OB came in, and she was there through the pushing. And I remember my pushing being counted for me, which often occurs. And it was like total dismissal of when I was having contractions. One thing I do want to mention is I had an epidural, and it was a breeze. It provided me the relief that I desired, and I was grateful to have it. I was in a better headspace going into delivery because I had the relief, and I knew that the epidural was successful because I could not feel pain, but I could still feel when I had contractions. And I didn't know that that went hand in hand with the successful epidural at the time, but it was nice to be able to still feel what was occurring without the pain in the moment. I pushed as the nurses told me to, and out came my beautiful firstborn daughter. And I remember she was laid on my chest, crying and looking at my husband and thinking, we've made this together, and this is the first day of a lifetime spent with one another. I remember they told me that I tore, and I had a pretty aggressive tear, both external and internal. So there was a lot of stitching that was occurring. And in the moment, you're not really thinking about that. They're just doing their thing, and you're just infatuated with this child. Once she was done stitching me, they attend to the child and also make sure I'm stable. I just remember so quickly do they take that child off of you and put them in a bassinet on the warmer, but like just thinking like that child belongs with me, they're all the way over there and I'm over here, and I have this wave of emotions upon me, and that's always difficult. And so we get through that, and we find out the weight and that her vitals are stable and I'm in good health, and they require you to go to the bathroom prior to going into the postpartum unit. And so at that time, I remember my epidural had wore off within like 20 minutes. I mean, I was really surprised by that, but I felt pretty good. And so I, got up to go walk to the bathroom, and like the blood that's falling from you onto the floor, and like your legs are shaky, and like you're just exhausted from birthing and laboring for so long. And I remember like the nurses, who are just angels, they both were on the side of me and walking me to the bathroom, and I was like going pee, and I just remember being like, I didn't think I'd feel like this postpartum, like I felt like there was that high, like you were supposed to just be like in such like a state of awe, and like, it was supposed to be the best moments of your life. And although that child being laid on my chest was like, quickly it shifted, and it was like, I feel like I'm like having my period openly on the floor with all of these staff members around, and like
Yeah.
I'm trying to pee, and like I'm having a difficult time doing that because I just got an epidural, and they were warning me about like, your stool is going to have a hard time coming because of your epidural and just delivery and everything. And so like anticipating that, and them asking me if I wanted stool softeners, like just things that I had not researched prior to this. And so living it in the moment was just like overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so I get cleaned up, and like hours went by before I was allowed to go to postpartum. I mean, it felt like eternity because my parents were there, they were ready to meet the child. And I remember like we were just continuing to like pause. I had my little girl at like 1:59 and in the afternoon. And I didn't get over to the postpartum unit, I don't think, until after 5. So I finally get over to the postpartum unit, and I just remember feeling really lonely. I remember like there was so much action just hours before. You have all these nurses attending to you. You are partaking in just this emotionally beautiful moment. And then hours later to feel like everything's falling through. Now you have this child who I'm now trying to navigate breastfeeding and navigate what their cries are communicating, and also trying to give the baby to my husband so that he can have time with them. And then you have foot traffic coming in and out, those checking your vitals, and like just constantly interrupting those moments that you're trying to like safeguard with your child. And so it was just a really difficult time. And thankfully, my child latched pretty well from the beginning. But I remember like just experiencing sore nipples so shortly after birth, and not having been prepared for that. And I felt like I was trying to put my best foot forward for this child. Like I had fostered children before, but never had I went through physical recovery and attending to a child. So this was like starting completely over.
Yeah.
And so I spent 24 hours after you deliver that are required within a hospital. And I remember them asking if we wanted to stay an additional night. And I was like, no, you just get me out of here. I don't wanna be confined to this room any
Yeah.
longer,
Yeah.
to this bed. Get me in an environment where, like, I enjoy it. And
For
so
sure.
I was also eager to just bring my child home. We get home, I remember the cats welcoming her, and she just fit right in with everybody. And
That's awesome.
those moments postpartum at home were also challenging. And I think the first and foremost challenge was breastfeeding. They make it seem so simplistic that the baby just latches and gets milk, gets the nourishment that they need, and that's that. Well, I forgot to include that when I was at the hospital, I had asked, well, how long are they supposed to nurse for? And they said, usually like 30 minutes. And I was like, okay. And so I wanted to ensure that my baby was getting the nourishment that it needed. And so I was so routine, and like it had to be 30 minutes. Like, and my child loved comfort and loved like nursing. And so because I was naive and uneducated, and she enjoyed comfort and nursing, that breastfeeding journey turned into what was 30 minutes every 2 to 3 hours to 30 minutes to an hour and a half on the nipple every 2 to 3 hours. And
Wow.
so, like, I was just obsessive over it because, like, I just wanted to make sure that my baby was getting enough. And so that led to, like, sore nipples, broken, like cracking nipples, and I didn't really know how to bring relief to that. And I like could not take it anymore. And I uh ended up ordering nipple shields off of Amazon. Honestly, the relief that I felt was so great. And I was like, this is I can make it through, just navigating motherhood as a first time mom when you're healing. That was
For
really
sure.
just the journey. Mentally, I felt fine, but it was also just waiting for my body to recover, especially from the tears. I remember like sitting and standing and walking where it hurt so bad. And I was told that I would be healed by 6 weeks. And I remember it was 6 weeks on the dot. And I made an appointment with my OB that day. And she's like, honestly, everything looks like it's healing pretty well. I don't know why you're in so much discomfort. Like everything looks fine. And I was like really discouraged because I was hoping to get answers. But I just remember those first 6 weeks, like between healing there and healing with my nipples and adapting to a newborn, like
Yep.
it was just a lot. But I can definitely say that postpartum long term was what I would say the majority of partum moms walk through. So
Yeah.
definitely like a learning experience, but a beautiful story through and through because every story is beautiful. And I appreciate you being able to let me share that in depth
Yeah.
because it means a lot to me and it'll always be my story.
Yeah, no, for sure. I appreciate you sharing too because it is very important too, and I've talked about this quite a bit too, just how it's always one way or the other. There's never a bridging between the two of like medical, non-medical at home or whatever, but there is trauma in different births, whether it comes from the actual birthing, the labor, the pregnancy, whatever. And it does matter because you don't know what you don't know. And with your first, it's so intimidating. The problem is, you're relying on your provider to educate you on all of these things. And sometimes when you ask questions, you don't even know what questions to ask because you've never been through it, for one. And for two, you are expecting them to educate you, but they might educate you on like a surface level, but then you just kind of feel more lonely. I want to go into um your next stage of motherhood. And I want to go ahead and tell the listeners here, if you are triggered by talking about miscarriage, then please either skip forward through or stop listening for a little bit, put it on mute, because we are going to touch on this briefly just because I think it's very important, because there are many moms who go through this, and this is part of your journey. And so I thank you for sharing. But, you experienced a miscarriage between your first and your second birth. How did that season impact you emotionally, spiritually, maybe even physically?
Yeah, it's a heavy topic. Want to start with that it is a heavy topic because when conception happens, life presents itself. And so when you have life coming forth at conception, it means that the day that that baby is made, it's now a child. And so I grieve it so heavily because whether a child is 1 day old in the womb or the child is 18 years old on earth, to me, it holds the same value. And so I unfortunately experienced a miscarriage when I was 7.5 weeks. I remember that phase in my life as being very emotional. I was also naive in that season, just with how to navigate it. I mean, it's not something that most women just research prior to it ever occurring. They usually walk through it while it is occurring. And so just trying to navigate that for myself, for my husband, for my family, and for my firstborn child. And so how quickly the joy of a positive pregnancy test can turn into devastation and mourning and loss. My heart goes out to all the moms that have experienced this because it truly is devastating. And I want to validate that. And I want you to know that if you have experienced this or you do end up experiencing this, that when you have a flood of emotions coming upon you, it is because you are grieving a child, a human being that was planted in your womb by God and is now departed from you, departed from this life. That is so painful. And I think so often this world tells us that that child was just more of an imagination, more of an anticipation. That positive pregnancy test means that you will have a baby here on earth. That positive pregnancy test means that you're anticipating what pregnancy is going to look like, what labor is going to look like, what delivery is going to look like, what postpartum is going to look like, what that child is going to look like. But that is some of what we're grieving, but we're also grieving that human. I unfortunately lost my child at 7.5 weeks. That child held value, not only in the kingdom of God, but held value here on this earth and in my heart. And so I will do whatever I can to be a voice and an advocate for that child, to be able to share of their life, no matter how short. I will go into a little bit of my story. I experienced some bleeding, came out of left field. I wasn't anticipating it like nobody is. And I remember just like hoping that the next time that I went to the bathroom, it wouldn't be there. And it was. It got heavier. And I remember reaching out to a friend who had also had bleeding recently in her own pregnancy, who then gave birth to that child. So that child was already here at the time that I was experiencing all of this. And she had told me that she had experienced heavy bleeding for days, and she still brought forth a beautiful child that made it here on earth. And so that was encouragement for me, because I was like so rooted on that, and that like there was still hope for this baby despite what my body was communicating.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought my story would fall similar to hers, and it just didn't. And I was passing blood, and I went downstairs, and this was over a period of hours, and it was a Sunday afternoon. And I remember going downstairs and sitting on the couch and trying to suck the blood back into myself. Like, it was just so heartbreaking. I just was trying to do everything in my might to like save this child. And I knew that I couldn't, but like I just felt like if I squeezed my legs together a little bit tighter, then maybe nothing would fall out. And I just continued to feel the stream of blood flow, and my mind just went to sad places. I remember calling the OB on call and expressing my concerns, and she said, just continue to monitor it and come in the morning, and we'll do blood work and we'll see what we can do. And I went in the next morning, and I was still continuing to bleed. And I remember they took me back and they sat me on the chair to get blood work done to check my hormone levels. And off to the side was a note on the wall that read something along the lines as, "What you are currently experiencing and all the hardship will be worth it when the baby is in your arms." And I just thought, that doesn't seem right. Like, because that's not what's happening to me right now. But like, I just remember in that moment thinking, like, I was so hypersensitive to everything that was happening around me. And so like, I saw that and I just kept thinking, like, what does that mean? Like, what I'm going through and what I'm enduring is eventually going to all be worth it when I have my baby. I was like, I don't think I'm going to get my baby. Like, this is not worth it. And that's not encouraging. And that really was painful to visually see. And so I remember getting my blood drawn, didn't say anything. And I left, and I knew that the test results would be coming in, and I had my chart. I went on, and what I forgot to mention was simultaneously, like, I showed up for work on Monday morning. And so like life continues on, and the demands of life doesn't stop. And so, I went to work, then I went to my appointment, got the blood work done, crying to and from everywhere I'm going. I get back to the office, and I remember the anticipation that the results would be coming through my chart, even though I believe that they were going to be calling me with the results. And so I get back to the office, and of course I get the notification that the test results came in on my chart. And I was like, I have to check. Like, I've been longing for answers during the past 24 hours. Like, I need that for myself. I looked at the number, and I could tell based off of my research that it was low. And I thought, this isn't good. And so I sat on that at my desk and just grieving it, and continued to go to the bathroom at work and continued to bleed. I got a my chart message that told me the numbers were low, they had concerns, they felt like it was going in the direction of miscarriage. And that I needed to retest in 24 hours to determine if the numbers were going to be like reduced. They typically give you blood work up front when you have signs of a miscarriage, and then they ask you to wait 24 to 48 hours later to retest. And if your levels have dropped by 50%, it's usually an indication. And so, I went home. It's now the next day. I go in to test, and same situation. I'm back at work. I look at my chart. The numbers are well over 50% reduction. I knew what this meant. I was anticipating a call from the office telling me that I just experienced a miscarriage, and I did not receive a call. I received a message on my chart that told me that it was indeed a miscarriage, and can't even tell you what else it said, but I just remember feeling baffled that that's how the health system communicated to me that I had just lost my child. Like, I wasn't valuable enough to even call me, to empathize with me, to sympathize with me, to express any sort of compassion in the hardest days of my life. Like, that really touched me. And these are things that I'm talking about when we as women are hypersensitive to things when we're going through a loss. Like, we remember everything. Like, here I am a year and a half later, like, I remember every little detail of what occurred. I knew I had miscarried, and this part is semi-graphic. I do want to preference that. I do feel like it's important to share because this is a part of the story, and this is something that I experienced and something that I hold in my heart and I hold in my thoughts and I hold in my emotions. So I am just giving you a forewarning. But I ended up passing my child while at work. And I went to the bathroom just like any other time. I knew the blood would fall, but I didn't know that that would be the moment where the sack would fall, where everything would fall. And I was in the bathroom stall and I could feel that it was a little bit bigger of a clot than I was passing. And I remember reaching down and grabbing the child and holding it and looking down. And I spent so much time looking at that thing, and I could see through the sack into, it was like clear. And in the middle was like a white blob of cells, my child. And I couldn't see anything super distinct, but I knew that that was my child, that had life at one time, and it was no longer having life throughout its body. And I just remember, like, I didn't know what to think. It was such a heavy moment, just standing there staring at it. I didn't know how I was going to proceed. Like, I didn't know. I was experiencing this all by myself. And so I sat there as long as I could. I captured that moment in my head, and I had a choice to make. Do I carry this sack back to my office so I can go make a memorial out of it? Or like I didn't know what to do with this thing. And I made the decision that I was going to soak in the moment and pray over the child and, put it in the toilet, and I flushed it. And I have regrets on that. I don't think either way would have been a conclusion to me. Like, I think you can wrestle with it both ways. It's now where it could have been from the beginning. I was lucky enough to be able to hold it. Not many moms are. And so, like, the natural process is you just pee, blood comes, it goes down the toilet, and that's that. And so I think that me actively having to like put it back in the toilet was like so difficult, but I also think how special it was that I actually can say that I held my child that little. And so I walked out of the bathroom and I had to tell somebody. Like, I had to tell somebody that I just lost my child. I remember I grabbed my phone, I went out to my car, I called my husband, I told him the news. I started weeping and he started weeping with me, and we're just so sad in that moment. And I just remember like such a peace over that moment, even though it was like the deepest, darkest moment of my life. Like, the Lord was right there embracing me and caring for me and nurturing me and reassuring me that that child is in his arms and being cared for to the fullest capacity that it could. And so it was just like a unique experience having the weight of the world on your shoulders, but also like having the Lord right there to like support you and the world at the same time. And so I remember going back into the office and I pulled one of my coworkers into a room and I was like, I just experienced a miscarriage, and I kind of just told her some things, and she opened up and shared that she too had experienced a miscarriage, and she wept with me. And it just meant a lot to me that she cared about my child just as much as I cared about my child, and that she was vulnerable enough to share her story and let me know that I wasn't alone. And I went back to my desk and I continued working. And of course, my thoughts were anywhere but work.
Yeah.
But I continued working. I continued showing up. I went home. I mourned with my husband. The next day came. I woke up. I went to work, acted like nothing happened. Meanwhile, everything in my mind is telling me that's not the case. And life just proceeds forward. And I guess I say that because to those who are experiencing miscarriage, you yourself are important and are valuable and are to be prioritized in grieving. Think about bereavement from the standpoint of if your spouse or like your parent or your grandparent pass away. Like, a lot of organizations will give you like 3 days of bereavement leave so that you can go and spend time processing, grieving, crying. And when you have a miscarriage, what is unseen is disregarded by the world. And that is unfortunate. And so I was grieving the loss of my child and also dealing with the healing aspects of it all. And I was also reporting to work, staying silent and choosing to stay silent
Yeah.
because it is an emotional thing. But I now, having walked through it and a year after it, can say that you are important enough to push aside things like work, things that aren't necessarily important but might seem important, to care for yourself and to care for your family. Because at the end of the day, family is most important. And I failed at prioritizing my own needs and like comforting my husband and just taking the time to heal from that experience, like apart from the demands of work and life. And it's something that I regret because I just feel like if my boss would have been in the know, then maybe I would have had more of an opportunity to come home and do just what I asked, which is of you to prioritize yourself. But I didn't. And I just think that that would have been helpful and should have been done, and it wasn't. And so this isn't something to be swept under a rug. Your emotions are real. Your emotions are valid. Your emotions are raw. And you have to take the time to prioritize those, and you have to take the time to process those. And I encourage moms who are walking through miscarriage to be true to themselves, to let themselves grieve through every stage, and to be the voice for their child, because that is something that I honor. That is something that I cherish. And if it makes somebody uncomfortable that I mention that I have an unborn child through miscarriage, that is okay by me, because I'm not trying to earn your comfort. I'm validating my child's life, and I'm doing what I feel is best to bring light and shine light upon their life. I do appreciate the opportunity to share on this topic today. I feel for moms who are currently walking through this right now or will in the future, and know that you are not alone. I read a statistic that 1 in 4 to 1 in 8 pregnancies end in miscarriage. That statistic is very high. If 1 in 4 is accurate, and I think that some of it, there's a lack of validity because like some women have miscarriages and don't report it. And so if 1 in 4 is accurate, that means that 25% of pregnancies that end in miscarriage. And so we as a community of women have to do better at supporting one another, encouraging one another, loving one another. I just recently this week had a dear loved one walk through a miscarriage, and it did bring back a flood of emotions of everything that I experienced myself. But I made it a mission to love that mom hard, to let her know that I was there, to give her a warm meal, to give her a gift of a memorial for her child, and let her know that my ear is always there to listen and to sit with and to grieve. I think once you experience a miscarriage in the depths of heartache, it's easy to then empathize with other moms who have also experienced it. And I can tell you that those other moms that you do share with and you do confine in and show up for. Appreciate it more than you know. I was blessed to have another healthy pregnancy following that. And I just feel like I have such a variation of motherhood experiences. Um, and they all make me who I am today.
For sure.
And the Lord has carried me through every season. And I do want to also reassure anyone who has gone through a miscarriage or will be going through a miscarriage in the future that the Lord will carry you through it. If you call upon his name, if you desire his comfort, you desire his direction, he will give it to you. And I can say that one of the most painful experiences in my life brought beauty and a closeness to the Lord that I would have never experienced had I not walked through this. And so for that reason, I am grateful for the outcome that came upon it.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. I know that that was really, really hard. And it was honestly hard for me not to get emotional too. All the emotions and the feelings and the things that you had to walk through is just really unimaginable. And I just really thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that. So I'm going to let you go ahead and just tell your second birth story uninterrupted.
Thank you. So, my second pregnancy, I began preparing early on for the birth and delivery and postpartum of my second child. I educated myself, I prioritized my health, I prioritized my mental well being. And so that played a huge role in why my second birth felt redemptive. From early on began to research more about, let's say, like medical interventions, epidurals, also just like ways that I could support my body through like stretching and active fitness and foods that I could be eating to just, help my child develop and things like that. And another huge aspect was praying, surrendering my desires to the Lord, welcoming the Holy Spirit and his presence through my pregnancy and then going before me into like labor and delivery and postpartum. I was just reading scripture over the baby. I was reading scripture over circumstances, over myself, just like connecting with God. And so I already had felt peace going into labor and delivery just because I had the Holy Spirit dwelling close to me. And I was reassured that his presence was near and that he was working amongst everything. My labor journey was interesting. So the night before I had my 40-week appointment, I was in my bedroom and I was having what I kept describing as like my baby is out of room. And so I just kept telling my husband, like, do you see like, a hand here and a foot here, and this baby is out of room. Like, this baby needs to come. And I was in no pain. I just like remember like thinking like my stomach looks like a deflated ball in the sense of like a deflated ball. And so I actually took a picture the night before I delivered. I took a picture in my bed because I was like, I can't believe my stomach looks like this. Like, this baby must be huge. Like, I don't have any room in there. Like, he needs to come. Like, it's now. And I woke up and I went to work and I showed up and our coworkers came in my office because they knew I was due and they were like, are you feeling anything? And I'm like, I'm not really feeling anything. I just like feel like I'm out of space. And so they were like, oh, well, I think that they're coming sooner than you think.
Yeah.
And so I had an appointment that morning at like 10 o'clock. And I drove to my appointment and I went back and my midwife came in and I remember the first question she asked was, are you experiencing any contraction? I said, no contractions. Just like, I think the baby is out of space and I just feel like they're pushing against my womb. And she was like, okay, well, let's check the heartbeat and then we'll do a cervical exam, which I consented to, and we'll see your progress. And I was like, okay. And so she checks the heart rate. It was great. Goes to do the cervical exam. And then I remember just like thinking in that moment, like, no process. Like, I'm still at a zero. And then she says to me, it's time for you to head to the hospital. And I was like, are you sure? And she's like, yes. She's like, you're pushing 7 centimeters and the baby is very low. I was like, wanted to cry in that moment. I remember like getting teary eyed, but I was also like, just keep it together because like, you always anticipate like the birth of your child. And so like for me not to expect it that day and then her like telling me, you're going to have this child today.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my goodness, like this was just such a drastic change from like my first story.
Yeah.
And so I remember like I was like conversing with her and I was like, okay, well, I know you want me to go to the hospital, but I don't want to go to the hospital because I want to labor a long time at home. Like I want to take a bath and I want to labor on the toilet and I want to listen to my music. And, like everything that I had spent my whole pregnancy preparing for because I felt like I knew what birth looked like. And I knew that there were ways that I could work through pain without just like enduring. Like I could welcome, I could distract myself, things like that. And so she like looked at me and she was like, there is no time for you to go home and labor at home. She was like, you need to go to the hospital. And I was like, okay. I was like, I just want to make sure I'm not going to be turned away when I go to the hospital. And she was like, you will not. And so I was like, okay, well, can I at least go home and change my outfit? Cause I was in business attire and, grab my stuff and head to the hospital. And she said, I'll allow you to do it, but you better be there within an hour. And I was like, okay. And so I left the appointment. I had like the biggest smile on my face and I got in the car and I went to call my husband and it was his work phone and it like rang busy. And I was like, it's never rang busy before. Like, I was like, that's so weird. And so I kept calling and kept calling and I couldn't get through to him. It just kept ringing busy. And so he has a family member that works at the same work location. And I had to call them to get my husband to notify him that he needed to come home so that we could go to the hospital together. Wow. And I ended up going back to my work first because I needed to grab my lunchbox. And I remember walking in and my coworker was like, well, how was the appointment? And I said, well, apparently I'm in labor and I was told to go to the hospital. And she was like, oh, wow. And like, at this point, like I definitely was having contractions that I had to like breathe through.
Yeah.
But like, I feel like I had prepared myself enough to like breathe through them well. And like, I was grounded and I felt okay. I call my mom and tell her I'm on my way. She was watching my firstborn. And I told her I was going to be heading to the hospital shortly. So I get home and I remember like getting into the house and my daughter came running up and was like trying to like, hang on me. And she had no idea that I was in labor. And I remember my mom's like, oh, honey, please get off of her. Like she's fine. She just needs a moment. And I was like, remember having like this like intense contraction. I was just like standing over the washer and I was just like breathing through it. I'm like, everything's going to be fine. And I like, that passes and I go upstairs and I put my outfit on and get changed and I come downstairs and Cam, my husband, had just got home. Okay, I'm ready. And so we jump in the car and the whole way to the hospital, I was blasting country music. I was laughing. I was talking to my husband. Like he even mentioned like, this is completely different from your first birth. So we get to the hospital and my husband was like, do you want me to drop you off at the door? And I was like, no, I want to walk in. And so he parks the car and we get out and I'm like continuing to have contractions that I have to breathe through. And it was like a long haul to the door and we get inside and another contraction hits me. And I like remember just like walking over to the side and like just like embracing it and like breathing through it. And I remember there was a staff member who at the time I was so in the moment that I didn't know he had asked this, but my husband heard and he had said like, do you want me to get a wheelchair? And my husband turns to me and he's like, do you want me to get a wheelchair for you? And I said, no, I'm good. And he was like, no, we're good. And like looking back at that now, I just like think about how contrasted that is from my birth story, from my first birth story, because my first birth story, like I was wheeled up to labor and delivery. The second time I like owned it and I was like, I know what I want. Don't get in my way. And I'm going to walk up to labor and delivery.
Yeah.
And so I did. And I got in the elevator and my dad happened to be at the hospital for like an x-ray. And so he wanted to kind of like give me like warm wishes and a hug before I actually went into the unit. And so he was waiting in the labor and delivery lobby, and I go up the elevator, and the doors open, and I remember another contraction hitting me, and I was like breathing through it. And I was like, I can't get out of the elevator. Like, I just like needed to be in that moment, just standing there.
Yeah.
And so I thought maybe I was going to take another trip in the elevator. And I finally breathe through it, and I step out, and I give my dad a hug, and he's like, I thought you were going to have the baby right there. And I was like, no. And so we got a good laugh, and we walk down the hallway, and we go to a room in the left. And if you know anything about me, that's contrasts to my first birth story, which is to the right. And I am very big on no change. Like, I love consistency. I like if something, for example, at my workplace was on my desk a certain way when I arrived that the previous employee had, I just left it there because, like, to me, it was like, that's how I came in, that's how it's staying.
Yeah.
And so, like, going into the left, I was like, I don't like this. I'm not familiar with this room. I went to the right the first time. Why can't I go to the right the second time?
Yeah.
And so I like quickly had to like shift my mind, like, no, like you are safe in this room. This is where you were meant to birth. Like, this is your space. And so quickly gathered myself. And I remember walking through all of the medical questions with, the nurse, and just continuing to breathe through my contractions. I was still standing at the time, just like waving my hips back and forth. And so, this was all like relatively quickly. And so I got into my gown. So when the nurse looked at me, she said, do you want an epidural? This is the only chance you're going to get. And I was like, no, I'm good. And then my husband was right there, and he looked at me and he said, are you sure you don't want the epidural? He said, because you're not going to get offered it again. Like I said, I was good.
Yeah.
But when fear creeps in, and I, had spent so much time preparing mentally for this birth and this experience, I was adamant that I didn't want the epidural at that moment. But then I remember thinking back to my first birth story where I tore.
Yeah.
And I was like, if I tear, I do not want to feel that.
Yeah.
And so and this all happened within a split second. And I was like, okay, yes, I'll get the epidural. And so that changed the trajectory of this birth story. But I can't say if my husband wouldn't have said that, if I would have not had one or had one,
Yeah.
like it is what it is. And so I said, yes, I want the epidural. And in that moment, I immediately went to, I'm going to experience relief in said 20 minutes. I can, release myself from any responsibility of trying to breathe through these contractions still. Like, I just felt like I had given myself the opportunity as a way out of what I was going through, even though it wasn't painful. It was like, oh, well, I don't have to like focus so hard. Like, I can just get this epidural. I got it the last time. Things went smoothly. I had no pain, but I could feel all the pressure. And that was that. And so my mind kind of just went. And like, I remember the anesthesiologist came up. She set me up. She gave me the epidural. She put a whole thing of tape on my back. Like, I mean, it was just coated in tape. There's no other explanation for it.
Yeah.
And it was super uncomfortable. And I remember every single time I had a contraction, my back would also seize with the contraction, with the epidural in my back. And I was in excruciating pain. Like, not only was I having labor pains in the front, but I was also having epidural pains in the back. And I was like, okay. I was like, it's like not working. And the anesthesiologist like walked out pretty much immediately after she administered it. And so I just like remember telling myself, like, it's just going to take a little bit of time. Like, I just need to be patient. And like, time went on, and it was like not getting any better. If anything, it was getting worse. And so I, in that moment, had to make the executive decision of like, now is your opportunity to either get your head back in the game, or this could go south and it could be another experience like your first birth. And so I quickly made the decision of like, okay, getting back in the zone. I'm going to breathe through my contractions. I'm going to do what I've prepared for.
Yeah.
And I do also want to know, I had one of those birthing combs that you like squeeze in your hand to try to like help your pain receptors like go there instead of like what you're experiencing in your abdomen. And I can honestly say that I do think that that helped me a little bit. And so I remember like clenching that and just like starting to breathe again through my contractions. And next thing I know, it's time to push. Like I could tell them that because the epidural failed and I was experiencing labor and delivery to the fullest. And so I was like, the baby's coming, and the midwife came in and was like, yes. And so I began to push, and I cannot recall if they were coaching me through pushing, but I do at least know that I was only listening to my body. So regardless of if they were counting, like I may have not been pushing while they were counting. Like I just ignored that and just like did what my body told me to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I like pushed for like, 10 minutes, and here comes my beautiful son, and they put him on my chest. Again, such a beautiful moment, way more present than I was for my first child. Like just the ability to like, neutralize my emotions and focus in the moment. And just captivate it. It was just so amazing, like it always is. And so I, like I said, like the epidural failed. So she began stitching me because I did tear slightly. Thankfully, it was not anything like it was the first time around. And so by that point, when she started stitching me, I can say that the epidural started to take a little bit. So like my legs started to get kind of numb, and then like it was like working its way up a little bit. And so like I think that there was a little bit of pain relief when she was stitching me, which was ultimately the goal anyway. So
Yeah.
for that I was grateful.
Yeah.
But then like, they attended to my child, they attended to me, and I remember like just feeling all of a sudden the sensation of like numbness come across like my lower half, and I like could not even like wiggle my toes. Like it was like an epidural, but I mean it was like the strongest epidural.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was laboring, my husband was like, "Do you want me to turn it up?" Because like it wasn't working. And so he thought it just needed to be more. And I was like, "No, don't touch it." Because I remember the first pregnancy, they told me if you touch the dial, you can't turn it down. I shared that with somebody recently, and they told me that that was not the case. So I don't know if that was just miscommunication. So I told my husband, like, do not turn it up. And I'm so
Yeah.
grateful that I told him that, because had I not told him that, and he turned that up, I could only imagine just how like, what else would have occurred following the
Yeah.
birth of my son, because, like, I was
Wow.
so numb. And so everything was smooth. I mean, I remember just being so in the moment. Everything was so sweet. Like, aside from that, like, it was just a beautiful moment of the birth of my son. And so all of that went so quick. And I remember, like, being in postpartum unit, like, within the hour or 2 hours. We were there for, like, maybe an hour or two, and it was, like, towards the end of before I was being transferred to the postpartum unit. And they wanted to get me up to go to the bathroom, and I was like, "I don't think I can. Like, I am so numb, I don't think I can do that." And so I, like, stood up, and I remember I had both nurses holding my weight and walking me to the bathroom, and, like, essentially, they were just dragging me to the bathroom, like, there
Yeah.
was no use to my legs. They set me on the toilet, and I just, like, remember, like, trying to pee, and I literally couldn't because, like, I was just so numb. And so I was like, I can't. And so like they took me back to the bed. And so they ended up transferring me, and I was in the postpartum unit. Like I was still numb. And I mean, I was continuing to attend to my child and just soak in the moment. But at the same time, like I still was. And
Yeah.
so I say all that because 7 hours later, I was still completely numb, which like epidurals, like my first went away after 20 minutes after I pushed out my child. So for this to still be lingering 7 hours later was definitely a concern of mine. And I did have a moment of, am I going to be paralyzed, or like, am I ever going
Yeah.
to get complete feeling back?
Yeah.
And so it was like one of those things that I did regret because I felt like didn't need it at the time.
Yeah.
And here I am, like, uh, feeling like, this anything would have been better than this.
Yeah.
Like, I don't
Yeah.
wanna feel this.
Yeah.
I ended up talking to my husband, and I was like, "Can you please pray over me? Like, we need to take this before the Lord because, like, I'm honestly starting to get nervous." And he prayed over me, and I can tell you that the Lord's hands came upon me and healed me because I started to get feeling restored in my legs within minutes of that prayer. And it had full feeling in my legs within an hour or two.
Praise the
And
Lord.
so that was a huge blessing. And then the rest of my postpartum experience was just the normal of, last examinations of the baby and me and paperwork and set on our merry way.
Yeah.
And like we came home and we're now a family of 5, 4 to the visual eye. And so, the rest is history. Like I'm 6 months postpartum and breastfeeding is going exceptionally well. I did want to note that I reached out to a friend who was in town the day prior to my birth, and I had shared with her that like breastfeeding was so painful of a journey with my first, and she currently was nursing her child. And I said, is it painful to nurse your child? Because her child was a year old. And she was like, painful? And I was like, yeah, like when he's nursing. And she was like, no, not at all. And I can honestly say, I think that saved my breastfeeding journey because in those first few days of being in pain with my second born nursing, I reminded myself that there was going to become a day where I wasn't going to have that pain anymore. And within, I would say, less than a week, that pain fully subsided and I don't have any discomfort now.
Yay.
And I'm so grateful for the words that she spoke to me because I feel like it was something that I could like rest on and hope for. And I saw it through.
Yeah.
And so, that was a testimony to just that experience. Everything is going great now, and I'm just enjoying my little one and just look forward to all of the upcoming moments.
What would you say to a mom who, feels discouraged after having maybe like a traumatic birth or something that was really challenging? It didn't go the way that they had anticipated it for their first birth, and then just wonders like, is redemption even possible for any of my other births?
I would say it absolutely does have the ability to be redemptive. I am a product of that. Considering my birth, my second, and contrasting that, being able to learn from your experience, I think, is so vital. And this is an opportunity set before you where you can own your story and you can advocate for yourself. And that advocacy on behalf of yourself is what is going to make or break your second experience. Don't let your birth story be dictated by the medical field, but let it be dictated by your time spent researching, your time spent preparing, and your time spent meditating and going through mentally what it is going to look like and how you're going to endure it.
I love that. Yeah. No, education is a huge piece of, I feel like, empowering. When you really do educate yourself, that fear too really goes away. And I think that it's really powerful. One thing that you mentioned was just about how your husband was a big support for you. And with your first, it's obviously a little bit different because you didn't know what that support necessarily needed to be, neither did he. But, your husband was your key support person. So what did he do that really just made a big difference for you in the second birth and the first?
Yeah, so we had taken the time during my pregnancy to sit down together and for me to share what my desires were and my expectations of him and myself. And that's something that we didn't do in the first birth. So I think, making sure that there's time designated to that during your pregnancy is so important. He also just always made himself available to me. And in my first birth story, he tried the best he could to advocate for me and love me as well as he could. I just was not responding well to it, and that was because there was a lack of communication. So communication is everything going into the second birth. Him asking me if I wanted the epidural was more of a gesture of love and just, I want to make sure that you feel heard and seen. Are you saying that you truly don't want an epidural because this is your last chance? And like, I do appreciate that he said that to me. And, he gave me the space to labor and deliver how I intended to the second time around. And he let it be a peaceful, quiet environment. And so I felt like he really respected my requests. And I asked that all fathers would do that for their wives because it's the least that they could do.
Yeah, I love that. And communication just in marriage in general is key,
Mhm.
right? In all things. And especially with birth, education for the husbands is very important as well. And I'm glad that he was able to be that for you too. I ask every mom that comes on here this question, but if you could speak one piece of empowering wisdom into the hearts of the mothers listening, what would it be?
You have the ability to be your biggest advocate. In your birth story, women were designed to carry, labor, and give birth to their children. Our bodies know what to do, and our mind can induce fear, it can induce chaos, and that can oftentimes derail our outcome desired. And so, my biggest tip, my biggest encouragement to all moms out there is self advocacy and the ability to do what you can to set yourself up physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually for the birth that you want. And of course, there's going to be things that don't go your way. There's not perfection in birth and there's not perfection in delivery. But being able to navigate those challenges because you're equipped and you took the time to adequately prepare and use your voice in moments where self advocacy is needed
Yep.
makes all the difference.
Wow. Thank you so much for just sharing your journey into motherhood. I really appreciate it. And I just thank you for coming on Her Birth, Her Story.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for being here for today's episode of Her Birth, Her Story. Ellen's story reminds us that motherhood is not one single experience. It's a collection of love, loss, resilience, and just deep devotion. And you can just hear it in her voice. And Ellen, I just thank you for your vulnerability and just truly sharing the joys of motherhood and just sharing the things that you have overcome in your journey, because I really believe that this is going to help set some women free and just encourage them and empower them through these tough seasons, but also through these beautiful seasons. Whether through foster care, birth, or miscarriage, every chapter of her journey matters, just like your journey. And it deserves to be honored. It deserves to be told. And until next time, we're going to keep reclaiming birth. Thank you so much for listening to Her Birth, Her Story. If today's episode resonated with you, please share it with a mama who needs to hear it. And don't forget to follow, rate, like, subscribe, and review the show. It helps these stories reach more women. Remember, no matter where or how you give birth, this is your body, your baby, and your birth. We are reclaiming birth one story at a time.